As I said, the theme was the VMO investments represent a key part of firms' strategy to bring more maturity and process discipline to IT. What I want to do now, having talked about the activity levels going up and the responsibilities, what do we see happening across a couple of case studies that I think are very telling and give you some best practices to think about. First was a large healthcare insurer. Catalyst for the VMO here was basically they were putting in place some very large outsourcing deals that they knew were going to need ongoing governance. The number of vendors that were ultimately managed under the VMO was 80. The key strategy for them was really to segment and tier their suppliers. So they were really focusing the 80% of their efforts on the 20% that were most strategic. The philosophy was the VMO orchestrates and coordinates between IT, finance, sourcing, in their case, or procurement, and the different business units and the suppliers. It was there to facilitate and improve the processes. And they went to a vendor management model where they had monthly scorecards, not only with the hard operational metrics, but with the qualitative metrics, responsiveness, the quality of the people, because those things can have as much of an impact on the relationship and the effectiveness supplier as a bunch of operational SLAs. Next one was a large industrial manufacturer. They're in 60 divisions, 270 locations worldwide. Catalyst here was a little different. It was part of a plan to rationalize what had become a very fragmented and, to a certain extent, in some cases, inefficient IT organization. And the implementation of SAP company-wide was also a big part of the catalyst for this rationalization and the need for governance. 75 vendors, similar number in terms of scale, in terms of the number submanaged. Key strategy here was we're going to standardize how we select our suppliers, how we categorize and manage the relationships, and then we're going to monitor the processes on an ongoing basis. So it was really a process-centric approach that they wanted to take to make sure that they were doing things consistently all the way through kind of requirements gathering, RFP, contracting, and the ongoing governance. Philosophy here is that the VMO bridges the skills gap between procurement, who knows how to do the contract, the IT team, who knows how to do the projects, to fill in that governance and that ongoing management void, and matrixing it across the different categories of spend and the different geographies because they are so global as an organization. Similar approach, quarterly reviews with the top 20 vendors to really keep a dialogue going. As one of the research interviews said, just sitting people down and talking through what the issues goes a long way to helping them understand and forcing them to solve them. Page out of the marriage, right? Sitting down with your spouse is just as important as sitting down with your suppliers. And the last one is consumer products. This is based on some of the conversations I had with Maureen and also what she shared with us on the panel yesterday from Nike. Here they wanted to provide more focus on IT-centric suppliers. Again, the ongoing governance, the fact that procurement wasn't handling the IT buying in the most effective way. They were treating it too much like a commodity, and particularly in a services environment, it's much less commoditized than some of the traditional things that might be procured in the Nike supply chain. 285 different suppliers here, given the global distribution of Nike. Key strategy here was to leverage money early on from rationalizing the maintenance contracts, up multiple millions of dollars, to get some very quantifiable savings, but also build the credibility and the license to expand the oversight across the full governance function and the full life cycle that I mapped out for you. And the philosophy here was to take much more of a full life cycle approach. And some of the interesting things that they've done, the classic scorecarding, but part of what they've done with their top-tier strategic vendors, they bring them in on a quarterly basis and sit down with the senior business executives to brainstorm around the business challenges within Nike and what they're trying to accomplish and get the vendors' input on that. So it becomes kind of a sourcing innovation steering committee, in so many words, where they're leveraging the capability of the supplier both to execute but also to help them innovate moving forward. So lastly now, as we build this theme that VMO investments represent a key part of firms' strategy to bring more maturity and discipline to their IT process, I'm going to talk about some of the best practices. And there are 4 that clearly come out. The first and the focus of almost all of what people are trying to do in the front end is to develop and implement clear, consistent processes. This is a big part of what's a catalyst, as you'll see in the second session, for people bringing in the tools. As Maureen said, it doesn't matter which tool you pick, just pick one of them because it'll force you to inventory, standardize, and rationalize your processes. Internally, market your successes and your value add. Dana from New York Bank of New York Mellon talked about how he categorizes the information he gets from suppliers and markets that internally on a monthly basis. Other VMOs quarterly report to the executive committee about what they've saved and how they've improved the process because it's key to building that credibility and not being viewed as another bureaucracy. Obviously, as we've seen through the case studies, inventorying and categorizing the vendors and then managing and monitoring those ongoing relationships, which I'll share with you more detail on, are a key part of their VMO activities. You know, the model for categorizing vendors is pretty consistent and pretty straightforward. It looks at the criteria, starting with level of spend. How much money do we spend with these people, right? $5 million or $500,000 is very different than a $400,000 or $440 million, strategic supplier. The other one is the scope and the real-time impact on the business. You know, this is particularly important for some of the telecommunications connections, some of the key software and services projects that are going on within your organization. Level of use within the company. Is it broadly deployed or is it only within one business unit? And then the length of the relationship. And the other one that I didn't put on here, which is important, is the degree of substitution. How quickly can we substitute one vendor for another or one type of product for another? And then out of that, you have 4 categories. The strategic top-tier suppliers, real-time importance to our business, high levels of spend, limited amount of substitution. The tactical suppliers, we may use them at a more limited level and only part of our organization. The commodity suppliers, it's very easy to swap out hardware, circuits in some cases. And then the niche, more specialized vendors. You know, this is the software provider that we're using in a particular business unit is a classic example of a niche provider. But then the other thing to do, and this is a best practice that we uncovered from one of the software companies, was to assess the vendor's strategic value. Not just to you, which is on the left, the vertical axis, but also how important are you to the supplier. And what comes out of this is 4 camps. The under-the-radar camp, neither you nor they pay that much attention to the relationship. The vendor submission camp, where you're very important to them, and they're much more responsive as a result of that. High level of importance on both sides. This is really the strategic relationship, the clear alignment. But then the one that we've labeled insomnia here is where that vendor is very important to your business, and you may not be as important to them. This is what keeps vendor managers up at night. And what we see people doing is moving spend from suppliers in the under-the-radar category up into that insomnia category to move that relation over to clear alignment. And it's a very simple way of clearly mapping what your exposure is.